The children of Israel are about to cross over the Jordan River and enter into the land that God promised to give to their fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their exodus from Egypt, which began with the selection of the Passover lambs on the 10th day of the first month, exactly 40 years earlier, would now be complete when they cross over the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. All of the elements of the Exodus and their journey to Mount Sinai are repeated here in the book of Joshua. These parallels are packed into this account of Israel crossing the Jordan River. Like the events of the Passover and the Exodus, God wants Israel to remember this crossing of the Jordan forever. As we examine this event and its parallels in the Exodus, we find repetitive mentions of Joshua, the Ark of the Covenant, the priests, and the Jordan River. It all begins with the concept of the threshold covenant. I'm Dan Cathcart, and this is the promise of rest. The threshold covenant is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible. However, its presence reverberates throughout the Scriptures. A threshold covenant is a covenant between the host, who is the occupant of a home, and a guest to that home. As the guest arrives, the host meets the guest at the door or the threshold of the home. And before the guest enters the home, the host will sacrifice an animal at the entrance of the home, allowing the blood of the animal to pour out into the recessed threshold across the doorway. The guest then enters the home by crossing over the blood in the threshold, entering into both the home and the covenant. The sacrificed animal is then prepared as a joint meal, ratifying the covenant. The covenant guarantees the mutual safety of the guest and the host. The covenant extends so far as to require the host to protect the guest while he is in his home. As an example of a threshold covenant in the Bible, it's when Lot invites the two messengers of the Lord into his home. He protects them from the mob at the expense of his own family. The mob demanded that Lot turn the guests over to them to abuse them. The guests in turn protected Lot and his family by bringing them safely out of Sodom before God destroys the city in judgment. When Joseph invited Jacob and the rest of his family into Egypt, he was ruler over all Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. The gifts that Joseph sent to his family, along with the invitation to come to Egypt, are a variation of the threshold covenant sacrifice. Joseph was essentially offering a threshold covenant on behalf of Pharaoh. When subsequent pharaohs mistreated the Hebrews, they were violating the terms of the covenant which set up God's judgment and the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt. In relation to the sequence of events involved in the actual exodus, the Passover, which sets up the departure of Israel, is a threshold covenant. H. Clay Trumbull, in his book, The Threshold Covenant, provides a detailed description of the covenant and its use in ancient Near East cultures and the Bible. Trumbull comments on the Passover. In announcing this desire for a welcoming sacrifice by the Hebrews, God spoke of it as Jehovah's Passover, as if the Passover rite was a familiar one, which was now to be observed as a welcome to Jehovah. Now, Moses, in reporting the Lord's message to the Hebrews, did not speak of the proposed sacrifice as something of which they knew nothing until now. But he first said to them, "Draw out and take you lambs according to your families, and kill the Passover," or the threshold crossover. And then he added details of special instructions for this new use of the old rite. So the exodus from Egypt began with a threshold covenant in which Israel invited God into their homes. As the honored guest, God protected them from the judgment on Egypt. When Israel arrived at Mount Sinai, God invited them into another threshold covenant, this time with Israel as the guest and God as the host. Now we saw evidence of a threshold covenant in our previous teaching when Rahab welcomed the two men into her home. Instead of a blood sacrifice at the door, the two men instructed Rahab to place a scarlet thread in the window through which they exited the home. They had entered into a threshold covenant very much like the Passover. In the terms of each covenant, the Israelites and Rahab were to remain inside their homes until judgment was completed. As we examine Israel's crossing the Jordan, we will see a threshold covenant like that at Mount Sinai, with God as the host. In this account at the Jordan River, the phrase crossover, or variations of the phrase, occurs 17 times. Crossing over the Jordan is a very significant event. At Mount Sinai, God instructed the people to prepare themselves to enter into His presence. Exodus 19, verses 10 and 11. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in sight of all the people." Now before Israel could cross the Jordan, God told them to prepare provisions, because within 3 days they would cross the Jordan. Joshua told the people to sanctify themselves for the crossing. Joshua 3, verse 5. And Joshua said to the people, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." This would not be just any crossing of a river. God would do wonders among them. The Hebrew word translated as wonders is palah, Numbers 63:81 in Strong's Concordance, meaning to distinguish or make great, difficult, or wonderful. One of the names of the Messiah, Wonderful, comes from the root word palah. Isaiah 9, verse 6. "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." The Messiah is the one who does great wonders. At Mount Sinai, after the children of Israel sanctified themselves, God called them to appear before Him. Exodus 19, verse 17. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. However, the people were cautioned not to come too close. Only the priests were allowed to draw near to the Lord. Exodus 19, 21 and 22. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at the Lord, and many of them perish. Also, let the priests who come near the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them." Now this distance from the presence of the Lord was maintained when God's presence entered the tabernacle with the children of Israel camped around it. Numbers 2, verse 2. "Every one of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard, beside the emblems of his father's house. They shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting." The pillar of cloud and the fire rested over the tabernacle. When it was time to break camp, the cloud lifted and led the way. The Israelites broke camp to follow the cloud. The company of Judah on the east side of the tabernacle went first, followed by the Levitical families of Gershon and Merari, carrying the tabernacle. Then the company of Reuben set out, followed by the family of the Kohath, carrying the ark and the other furnishings of the tabernacle. The companies of Ephraim and Dan brought up the rear. On the banks of the Jordan River, the camp would be set up like usual, with the tabernacle in the middle. When it was time to cross the Jordan, God, as the owner of the promised land, and the host inviting Israel into his land, called the children of Israel to enter his presence. Joshua 3, 2 through 4. So it was after 3 days that the officers went through the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out for your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way before. Now this is a significant departure from the usual order of march. Instead of the camp of Judah going first, the Ark of the Covenant was to go first. Instead of the Kohathites carrying the Ark, the priests were to carry the Ark. Joshua 3, verse 6. Then Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, Take up the Ark of the Covenant and cross over before the people. So they took up the Ark of the Covenant and went before the people. At Mount Sinai, the priests were allowed to draw near and to be a buffer between God and the people. This seems to be the case at the Jordan as well. The priests were to carry the Ark of the Covenant before the people, but the people were to maintain their distance from the Ark. The Ark of the Covenant is a focal point of this account. The Ark is mentioned, like the phrase cross over, 17 times in this account. It is called the Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, the Ark of the Covenant of the Master of all the earth, the Ark of the Testimony and the Ark of the Lord, the Master of all the earth. In all, 7 different ways to refer to the Ark. So what is the significance of the numbers 7 and 17? 7 is the number of spiritual completion. 17 is the sum of 10 and 7. E.W. Bullinger, in Numbers in Scripture, explains the significance of the number 17. When 10 and 7 are united in the number 17, we have a union of their respective meanings. That is, spiritual perfection plus ordinal perfection, or the perfection of spiritual order. So what is it about the Ark that symbolizes the perfection of spiritual order? The Ark contains the tablets of the covenant that God made with Israel at Mount Sinai, a jar of manna representing God's provision for his people, and Aaron's staff that budded, symbolizing God's covenant with Aaron to be priest before him forever. Now finally, the Ark is the place where God speaks to his people. Exodus 25, 21 through 22. You shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I will give you. And there I will meet with you, and I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim, which are on the ark of the testimony, about everything which I give you in commandment to the children of Israel. As God is giving Joshua these instructions about the priest carrying the ark before the people, he reveals to Joshua that he is going to magnify Joshua through the events that happened that day. Joshua 3, verse 7. And the Lord said to Joshua, This day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. God instructs Joshua on what he is to say to the priest and the people. By going through Joshua, God exalts Joshua in the eyes of the people. Joshua is God's chosen leader and the mouthpiece of God. He tells the priests that they are to stand in the water at the edge of the Jordan River. Joshua 3, verse 8. You shall command the priests to bear the ark of the covenant, saying, When you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan. Then Joshua gathers the people and prepares them to receive a sign from God, confirming that God will go before them and drive out the inhabitants of the land. Joshua 3, verses 9 through 11. So Joshua said to the children of Israel, Come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, By this you shall know that the living God is among you, that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Hivites, and the Perizzites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over before you into the Jordan. Now, in this passage, Joshua refers to the ark as the ark of the covenant of the master of all the earth. In other words, God is sovereign over the entire creation, including the Jordan River. Then Joshua explains the wondrous signs that God will give them. Joshua 3, verse 13. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, the waters that come down from upstream, and they shall stand as a heap. Now remember, this is the 10th day of the first month, when the spring rains caused the Jordan to overflow its banks. The ford over which they are crossing, which would have been no more than 3 feet deep at other times of the year, is probably much deeper at this time. The priests lead the way, carrying the ark with the people following behind them. As soon as the priest's feet touched the water, the flow of the Jordan River stopped. Joshua 3, 15 through 17. And as those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the ark dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks during the whole time of the harvest, and the waters which came down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zaratan. So the waters that went down into the sea of Arabah, the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Then the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over on dry ground, until all the people have crossed completely over the Jordan. When the waters stopped, the priest moved into the middle of the river and stood there on dry ground, while the people crossed over before them. As they crossed over, each and every one of them passed before the ark and the presence of the Lord, coming close, but not too close, with the priest as a buffer between them and God. No one could cross over into the land without passing before the Lord and accepting the threshold covenant. As God's guests, they agreed not to do any harm to God, His land, or His people. This was made clear when the children of Israel were still at Mount Sinai, and God gave them instructions regarding the land. Leviticus 25, verse 23. The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me. Ezekiel writes about a time when God will once more gather His people in preparation for entering the promised land. Each person will have to pass before the Lord before entering the land. Ezekiel 20, 37 through 38. I will make you pass under the rod, and I will bring you into bond of the covenant. I will purge the rebels from among you, and those who transgress against me. I will bring them out of the country where they dwell, but they shall not enter the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Ezekiel uses the imagery of passing under a rod instead of crossing the Jordan River as the threshold. A shepherd uses his rod to guard the entrance or threshold of the sheepfold. He allows only his sheep to pass under the rod and enter the fold. At the Jordan River, the first of the tribes to pass by the ark was not Judah, as one would have expected from the usual marching order. Instead, the first ones to cross were the armies of Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh. Joshua 4, 12 through 13. And the men of Reuben, the men of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed before the children of Israel, as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 prepared for war crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. Now here at the Jordan River, God sent an army ahead of the children of Israel. They were prepared to take possession of the land that God promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The wondrous signs that God displayed at the Jordan River is very much like the signs that God displayed at the Red Sea. At the Red Sea, God parted the waters and brought Israel out of Egypt on dry ground. They crossed over the threshold as they left. Pharaoh, who violated the terms of the threshold covenant with Israel, along with his army, was destroyed at that very same threshold. Now at the Jordan River, God is bringing Israel into his land. They crossed over on dry ground, completing the journey that began in Egypt. In the process, God exalted his chosen leader, Joshua. Joshua 4, verse 14. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they had feared Moses all the days of his life. As we conclude, we have demonstrated the parallels between the events of the Exodus out of Egypt and the crossing of the Jordan River, especially at the entering into the threshold covenant with God. There are more parallels yet to be discovered as the priests come out of the Jordan River. So stay tuned. I'm Dan Cathcart for Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.